What would you do if you just let yourself, instead of telling yourself you can't? I remember the night this question came up for me back in 2017. I had just watched the last episode of Criminal Minds available on Netflix. That would be episode 252, the end of season 12. The question had waited patiently while I turned into numb mode for 10,584 minutes. That's over 176 hours of binge watching serial killers being caught on my TV. In hindsight, how ironic that I chose a show full of dismembered bodies to suppress the feeling that my life wasn't whole. But apparently, I had needed all this time to be willing to face the question and the answer that came up. If I let myself, I would coach again. Something I had given up when moving to the US, because a loud, mean voice in my head told me I couldn't. Or, to quote the voice directly, "Who do you think you are?" Before I tell you where I went from there, I want you to take a moment to think about the mean voice in your own head and ask yourself, what is the one thing you would do if you didn't tell yourself you can't? I recommend you write down your first thought, the thing that came up before your rational mind took over. I wish I could tell you that when I had my answer, go-getter me went right for it. I didn't. Because knowing what I want didn't automatically make me believe that I could. So I did what I had done all my life when I felt out of my depth. I started reading, taking courses, researching programs. Mind you, I had been certified as a coach in Germany in 2012. And no book I read or course I took made me feel ready. Took me a while, but finally I realized that learning would not help me get there. That's when I had my light bulb moment. It was time for me to unlearn. And what we're talking about here is where I got started, with unlearning negative self-talk. What I have for you today are 5 truths about the worst critic there is, our inner critic, and 5 tips to tame the negative self-talk. So let's dive right in. Truth number 1. Absolutely everybody has this critical inner voice. You are not alone in telling yourself that everybody else may be good enough, but not you. Sounds a little different for each one of us, but you know what I'm talking about. You're too stupid, too lazy, too clumsy, too short, too small, too tall. My current favorite, too old. Ultimately, it all comes down to not being good enough. We all share that. That means your parents are beating themselves up too about not being good enough. And that coworker you feel criticized by so much, they're most likely criticize themselves even more than you. How would I know that? Because I have yet to meet someone who is harder on others than on themselves. The stuff we tell ourselves in our minds, would you ever say these things to others around you? No way, right? Truth number 2. The negative voice is not the essence of your being. It's just one aspect of many. Granted, it can be a very loud and scary one, like the bully back in school. And because they are loud and scary, we pay them more attention. And we do the same with our negative self-talk. But when you think about it, there are lots of other messages our mind sends us. Just think back to the last time you took a day off, went to the beach or hiking or skiing with your family or a friend. You had a blast. Chances are you were not spending the day beating yourself up over some shortcomings you see in yourself. When we're happy, we hear other voices. Sometimes there's a voice cheerleading us, or one that may sound like a stubborn little kid, or a protective one, all with their own different messages. And most importantly, we have an observer that allows us to reflect on our thoughts. There are a lot of aspects to ourselves, and this inner critic is not the true you. Truth number 3. Our inner critic requires perfection, which means that whatever you do to please the voice will fail because perfection is an illusion. Think about it. Have you ever called yourself perfect? I haven't, and I bet you haven't either. That's because perfection is something we only see in others. And those others also see perfection in the next person. They have someone else. So it's part of being human and part of the comparison culture we live in. So perfection does not exist. We are chasing an illusion we cannot achieve. Let's say your negative self-talk focuses on you being lazy. Did that ever stop in times when your average workday lasted 10 or 12 hours? When you worked every weekend, never took time off? It didn't, right? Our inner critic simply raises the bar or refocuses. So maybe now you're not lazy because you don't work enough, but because your house isn't spotless or the laundry hasn't been done in a week or two. So being willing to let go of perfection is probably the biggest act of kindness you can do for yourself today. It's also a great starting point to undermine the power of negative self-talk. Truth number 4. The critical voice does not offer sustainable motivation. Many of us feel that the inner critic is their driving force, and if we didn't have it, we would fail. My inner critic used to terrorize me with, you don't do enough, you need to work harder, you need to work more. Sounds familiar? My response was to think that if I don't give in to the voice, it means I'm lazy. But that's not true. The truth is, when I don't give in to the voice, I can give my body the rest it needs. Using negative self-talk as your motivator may set you right on the path towards burnout, the way it did for me a few years back. I hope you can do the work and turn things around before that point. Because eventually, it's close to impossible to hear the other voices that tell you, it's time to take a rest. Take it slow today. Be gentle with yourself. And truth number 5. Your negative self-talk is not real. It's not facts. It's only thoughts. And we can change our thoughts. We are actually quite good at it. We do it all the time. Let's say you meet someone for the second time and you're like, oh, I'm wondering, why didn't I like them last time? They are great. Oops, thoughts changed. More importantly, it's a choice. You made the choice to take a second look at that person and connect with someone you did not connect with last time around. You choose, you change. I know it's a little more difficult with our stream of negative self-talk, but it can totally be done. There's no quick fix or shortcut. It's an ongoing process. But stick with it, and I promise it'll get much better, much easier, and actually pretty soon. And here are my 5 starting points to tackle negative self-talk. Tip number 1, turn your awareness to your inner critic and then turn its volume down. To change our negative self-talk, we need to be aware of what's going on. Make a mental note when the mean voice comes up, or say out loud, that's my inner critic complaining. And then close your eyes, visualize a vintage radio with the knobs to turn, and imagine the voice coming from that radio. And now you turn the volume down, not fully off, just down to the point where it's nothing more than background noise. Allow yourself to actually make the hand movement. That's a good reminder in everyday life when you need to put a distance between yourself and your inner critic. Tip number 2, make a conscious decision not to believe what you hear. Remember, it's not a fact, it's just a thought. If your inner critic is like mine, wants you to work harder all the time, you may want to remind you that most likely you already work pretty hard. So hear it and say, no, or stop, or thanks, I've got this. Whatever works for you. Another way I like is some good humored mimicking. So for me, that's bat, 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 bat. And you probably have a similar sound for you that would do the same thing. The entire process can be annoying for a while because you have to do it over and over and over again. But it's worth the effort. I can tell you, my inner critic has become so quiet, it hardly ever bothers me anymore when I'm taking time off. So I can finally be on the couch and read a good book without feeling guilty. That alone is worth the effort. Tip number 3. Replace the most dominant negative thoughts with something more positive. And I'm saying more positive because for most of us, it's not really feasible to go from you are too lazy to, oh, I'm so productive. We usually need a few steps in between. So in my example, the first step could be, I'm doing enough right now, or I am doing the best I can today. That's a good one anyway. You may want to find something that's a little outside of your comfort zone, just a little bit of a stretch, but not too much. Whatever your replacement thought is, write it down and make a few visible reminders, like on your phone, bathroom mirror, a sticky note you put somewhere. And when the negative thought comes up, think your new thought, or even better, say it out loud. I know that can feel a little weird at first, but it's really just a matter of practice. And when you feel good about the new thought, choose a phrase that's a little more positive, and so on, more positive until you're in full-blown positive thought territory. Tip number 4. This is very general, but super important. Ask for help. If that makes you uncomfortable, I want to give you a new perspective. When I ask people in the workshops I teach, who likes to help others, all the hands go up. People love to help. It makes us feel good to be of service to others. But when we need help ourselves, we say, I don't want to bother anyone. Think about it this way. What you're doing is taking the good feeling of helping away from someone. So if your negative self-talk becomes overwhelming, please reach out to someone you trust and talk about. And if that really feels like too much at this point for you, start with talking to the mirror. That's a good first step. Thoughts and feelings tend to lose their power over us when we drag them out into the light. And last but not least, tip number 5. Make it a point to become your favorite person. Because think about it, you are the only person you will be spending every second of your life with. So that might get me some resistance or pushback, especially from mothers. But I believe there's a good kind of selfish, and this is it. Being your favorite person does not take away from loving others. In fact, it actually adds to your relationships because it helps you build healthy relationships with healthy boundaries. It's really just about putting your own oxygen mask first. Be the person who can embrace themselves with the good sides and the bad ones. And trust me, it'll allow you to show up much more fully for anybody else in your life too. This is not easy work, but it's totally worth it. The negative voice will not go away completely, but you can quiet it down a lot. And most importantly, you can get to the point where it has little to no power over you and your life. You're worth that effort. To conclude, let's go back to the question I asked you at the beginning. What is the one thing you would do? if you didn't tell yourself you can't. Check in with yourself. Maybe speak the thought you wrote down out loud. How does it feel now? Can you open up to the possibility of doing the thing? I hope you can, because you are worth living your dreams. You are worth it, full stop. And I'm rooting for you. On a personal note, I still have 3 seasons of Criminal Minds to watch. And I will eventually, because I like the show, not because I need Netflix to distract me from my thoughts and feelings. I have indeed unlearned believing the mean voice. These days, when the thought I can't comes up, I tell my inner critic, watch me. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining me for this video, and I welcome your questions and comments.